Hi, and welcome to a new edition of Newsmakers TV, Santa Barbara's most popular and provocative local news program, on the air since 2014. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, September 1st, 2023. And as we head into the Labor Day weekend, signaling the traditional end of summer, a reminder there are only 124 shopping days until Christmas, and just 26 days until the last ever big screen public showing of Citizen Macaw, the acclaimed documentary tracing the ruination of Santa Barbara's historic daily newspaper. Full details on our website, newsmakerswithjr.com. Fortunately, we have considerable reporting talent left in town, and I'm very pleased to welcome back several of Santa Barbara's top local journalists to today's all-star panel. Investigative reporter Melinda Burns, currently ensconced in a remote mountain site at a secret location in the western United States, and urban affairs reporter Josh Molina, who also hosts Santa Barbara Talks, the most popular podcast on Newshawk. And we hope to be joined soon by Kelly Fozzie, staff reporter for the Santa Barbara Independent. In the meantime, Josh, the weekly ape dance known as the Santa Barbara City Council was back at it on State Street again, trying to fix State Street in advance of the 2050 deadline for the master plan. What are they up to now? What have they done this week?
Well, they had another meeting to hear recommendations by an ad hoc committee made up of 3 members of the council. So it was all 7 looking at little tweaks they could make to the State Street Promenade to help everybody feel more comfortable with all the different uses there. The issue really came down to bicycles and whether to have a dismount zone and whether to have a speed limit. That's what the focus of the meeting was. So they essentially said that we're going to have not a dismount zone, like bikes will be allowed on the promenade, but we're going to create striping so that there are bike lanes on State Street, so you don't have people, pedestrians, people walking their dogs, kids, seniors, having to deal with the space and compete with the space with people on bikes and e-bikes, because e-bikes have really changed the whole flow and tone and feel downtown because they can go really fast. And so they said, let's do that. But then on top of that, they try to figure out, well, let's have a speed limit. And that went off the rails. That whole conversation went off the rails because some people said, what's the point of having a bike lane if you're not going to slow the bikes down? Police Chief Kellyanne Gordon says, we can't enforce that. We're going to have cops like on every corner.
What's the speed?
There is no speed limit on State Street at all. There was talk of 20 miles an hour being a limit. And a couple of council members said, that's too much. That's too fast. I want it like 10. I want it to be slower. And Gordon's like, let's start off with the lanes and we'll see what happens. But Council Member Alejandro Gutierrez, Council Member Mike Jordan, really pushing for, come on, if you have bike lanes, but you don't have any way of like enforcing how fast people go, who's going to take over there? It's going to be the bad actors. It's going to be the people who are speeding. And if there's no sense of there's going to be a punishment, what are we doing? And there was talk of spending $7,500 for some signage. They didn't really like that. And so it got to be real weird there because people want bikes, people don't want bikes. And then if we're going to have bikes, we should have a speed limit. Mayor Randy Rouse said,
the only rational person at City Hall, yes.
He was paraphrasing, and he said, I'm paraphrasing him, and he said, it feels like we're doing everything we can to not do the most simple thing, which is have State Street closed to cars for the 500 and 600 blocks, and then open it up to vehicles the rest. Because the other part of this conversation was, we want a shuttle service or like a golf cart, they said, a tram, and the ability for seniors to get dropped off in front of the Granada Theater during shows. And so he sort of felt it was getting overly complicated. Like this block would have a tram, this block would have a shuttle, this block would have bikes. These blocks would be closed. Like, he thought it was getting too complicated. And he said, why don't we just bring the cars back, bring all the vehicles back, and we'll just leave 2 blocks that are closed to cars. And so it was very, this council is just fascinating to me in my more than 20 years of experience. And this isn't revisionist history, but this council has a hard time making decisions. And it almost feels, and I'm not telling them to go violate the Brown Act, but it almost feels like the first time they talk about these things is when they walk into the chamber. Research, 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 figure it out where you stand. Of course, listen to public comment. But for Gordon to come on there and say, we can't police that, it feels as though that conversation, like, you could send an email to Gordon, hey, I want to ask you about this, get that answered, so that the bulk of the conversation is about what are we going to do. So it's scattered, people are all over the place. And then Eric Friedman, so Randy said, why
was
don't we
on
just
our show last week and said he was going to reintroduce this thing that he had about only closing a couple blocks. Did what?
He kind of wavered a little bit because Randy said, let's go with Eric's idea. He's the one who mentioned it. And Eric said, I still believe in that idea, but I'm not prepared today to move forward. I have to do more research in the context of this. So that's kind of where we're at. We're going to have striping fairly soon. It's going to be striping of delineators. It won't be green, Jerry. Okay, I think it'll just be stripes, not like bike zones. Oscar Gutierrez had said, hey, can we put it in the middle? Like, let's not put it in the middle. Like,
well, that's more like, I think that's more like East Berlin, Josh. That's probably why Oscar wanted to do that.
Well, I'm sorry. He did not want to put in the middle. He said, keep it out of the middle so that people have space to walk. But the city said, well, we still have our outdoor dining. So we have to put these bike lanes in the middle. So I'm looking forward to seeing how tight and cramped that's going to be with outdoor dining, bike lanes, and then a pedestrian zone. And it is what it is. The good news is they're looking at this. Yes.
So Josh, the pedestrians are on the sidewalk then?
No, they're still allowing for pedestrians to be able to walk in the street. It's a space for everybody, but there's this delineated bike lane. When I'm on State Street, I kind of use the sidewalk because it just feels normal, natural. Yeah. And when I walk in the street, I end up doing this the whole time, just kind of keep looking behind me. So I think people might naturally gravitate toward the sidewalks.
I just think it's fascinating, not just here, but all over the country. Cities grappling with their downtowns and what to do after office workers made an exodus during the pandemic, and housing is not the only question. It's what to do with the office buildings, but also how to accommodate restaurants if restaurants can still survive.
Yeah,
and help them survive. And
I think we're doing. I mean, I think the council's certainly looking out for the restaurants. That's kind of priority number one over there. It's just everybody else and the other businesses. Melinda, you're of course at your summer palace, so you haven't been in town much. But I mean, Josh just talked about looking behind him all the time when he's. I mean, that's my feeling as well. Do you feel safe down there? You're almost as old as I am.
I think I'm 1 year older.
Oh, okay.
I do feel safe. It's a big, wide street. I haven't felt threatened by bicycles on State Street. The e-bikes, I'm up here in near Yosemite, and they're battling with how to reduce traffic and figure out how to accommodate an overflow in Yosemite, and they have to figure out what to do with e-bikes there too.
Yeah,
it's just not an easy solution.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, our council will get to the bottom of it. So, Josh, the other thing, they also finally agreed to Randy's deep cleaning, a phrase we heard more than once during the mayoral election. Is that correct?
Well, they sort of even botched that a little bit. There was talk of a regular, or not a regular, but a deep cleaning of State Street and the side routes. They gave direction to staff to figure out or plan for deep cleaning. So that action itself was not specifically taken, but they said, hey, staff, figure out how to do it. Who was it? It might have been Mike Jordan. Yeah. Saying we don't have cars anymore, but we got kids carrying ice cream cones on State Street. So the streets are really dirty, and so it's a different kind of stuff that's happening because we don't have, gas and oil and stuff. We've got food. So it was almost a 4-hour meeting.
And you're
really
exactly
insane.
right. I mean, they walk in there and it's like this is the first time they've heard about any of this. And, they sit there and half of them are like, oh, I have an idea. Why don't we try this out? It's just, it's not, we're not getting a lot of really strong policy making out of there. And just explain to me what the beef is. Why won't they open up a couple of blocks? It's obviously 9 blocks is too long. This does not seem to be something. Is there some political thing I'm missing here?
Well, yes. Politically, the sort of environmental benefits of not getting people out of cars and having people on bikes and walking downtown is the goal of the bicycle community and the activists who are very much pressuring City Hall. And a lot of the staff and the traffic department feels that's a good way to move people as well. They also did this community survey, and according to the multiple surveys, more than 70% of people want part of State Street closed. And then you do have the restaurants.
Part of State Street.
Yeah. And then you do have
Doesn't
the
mean
restaurants.
9 blocks of State Street.
Josh,
Yeah,
have they talked about parklets, little park? I've seen that in other cities where they would like extend a little parklet, not a cafe, but just a green area into the street.
Oh,
yeah, not restaurant parklets. You don't mean,
right.
You mean
Yeah.
green areas.
Actual parks.
Probably.
Oh, not really, but in Goleta, the Kyriel Center out, by Fairview, Hobbs Group is redesigning that whole center, and they're doing that. They're putting green space in those little alleys and paved connections. So that's part of it. There is a movement, and at this meeting, you have young bike activists reading from prepared notes from their iPhone, sort of talking about cars are bad and we need to, bike. And that's their perspective. So that is the feeling. The thing is that it's unfortunately become like this generational battle. Like Randy is demonized as being like the out of touch older guy who wants to drive a car. And no one on that council is really articulating a vision that brings people together. Occasionally Megan Harmon has had tinges of that, but quite honestly, she's
she's very good at talking out of both sides of her mouth. That's why she has tinges of it. But yeah, well,
she hasn't had that presence lately, and so it's just a lot of this, and Rebecca's going like this, and it's just kind of all there for everyone to see.
Well, pretty soon they'll be pleased because there won't be any business down there except for a parklet, and they can ride bikes all over the place. All right, Melinda, next week is the first, I don't know, first only bankruptcy hearing about our late lamented morning paper. And it's complicated. There's like 500 creditors listed, and of course there's been all kinds of litigation and so on. Can you kind of sort out what the different strands of the creditors are, particularly as it applies to the employees and the former employees?
Well, first of all, it's listed actually as a meeting, not a hearing.
Okay.
No decision will be made.
No decisions will be made?
No decisions will be made.
Okay. Good.
Creditors can ask questions of a representative of Ampersand, the company that Wendy owns, that owned the news press. Likely it will be some other representative than Wendy. And then there will be a bankruptcy lawyer hired by Wendy who will sort of MC this meeting. And And the questions.
There's no independent finder of fact and this.
There may not be a judge. I'm not
okay.
sure about that.
Okay.
And so any creditor can sign up, and I understand it's mainly a telephone meeting. I'm not sure about that either. The documents are housed at the bankruptcy building on State Street that Wendy owns. So yeah, she's saying that she has $500 in the bank for Ampersand, the business that owned the news press, and that she owes something like $5 million to creditors. That would include $3.5 million to my former colleagues at the news press.
So the bulk of it is really to the employees and former employees.
Yes, although probably the largest single beneficiary is Wendy's. She's got a couple million for herself and for Arthur von Weissenberg, the co-publisher. So yeah, the 3.5 million is because she violated labor law, and that was established in 2017 by the National Labor Relations Board. And then in 2019, so the violations are for bad faith bargaining, illegal hiring of Dennis Moran and Richard Miniards, illegal hiring of temps to displace workers without negotiating with the union, and suspending merit pay for everybody, including Marilyn McMahon, who'd worked there for like 4 decades after the union vote. And those are violations of labor law, and she was ordered to pay $2 million in 2019. That sum is now $3.5 million because of interest.
Wow.
So
here's my question. So are the Teamsters going to attempt to pry some of that money out of her other holdings, which are obviously considerable? Or are the Teamsters not really a party to this?
Well, they stand to, I forget what the total is for them, a couple $100,000 maybe.
In legal fees.
And their expenses for a negotiator and hotels and food during all of these non-bargaining sessions, which I had to sit in on, and so did Marilyn McMahon. And so did Dennis Moran, and he was promptly fired. But, you know, they just sat there and said no, month after month after month of these. You know, we'd go down to the DoubleTree, and the negotiator would have a room there, and then we'd have a conference room. We'd go into the conference room, and there would be 3 or 4 people from the news press, plus a union busting lawyer, and they would sit there and say no, and it was insulting. One time I got so mad I ran out of the meeting and slammed the door. And Travis Armstrong.
Linda, that's so uncharacteristic of you.
Travis Armstrong wrote an editorial about it, smearing me in the paper again.
Yeah, well, that kind of violence is endemic to the Teamsters, that door slamming thing. You know, I have terrible PTSD about the DoubleTree because that's where my hearing was held as well. And oh my God, what a night.
It was a real drag to be there and have to listen to that. And we had to take copious notes and then turn the notes over to our lawyer, our Teamster lawyer, Ira Gottlieb, because they were building a case. Obviously, we were building a case for bad faith bargaining. And those cases are extremely hard to prove.
Which you won.
A slam dunk.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the it's not clear whether it's the NLRB's case, and I think that the Teamsters are going to, you know, stand back and hope that the NLRB will aggressively pursue getting these colleagues, former colleagues of mine, paid.
All right. You mentioned Marilyn McMahon a couple times, our colleague who died last week at 93. And she was a great woman. You have a really nice obit in the Independent, and I want to talk about that. But Josh, I think you had maybe the last interview with Marilyn, huh? When you were working on your piece about the bankruptcy, and what was your takeaway from that? She seemed to me, on the phone at least, to be, pretty energetic. She had good energy. She was funny still till the end.
Yeah. Yeah. It was one of the highlights of my reporting recently, because I had called her up because she was somebody who was on the list of people who were owed money through the bankruptcy, and she was owed something like almost $70,000. And there's a long list, like, let me call Marilyn and just get her thoughts on this. So I called her, and obviously I worked with her. We worked with her, the News Press, so I knew her, comfortable with her, and she's very, very kind person and nice and patient and a journalist. So she knew exactly what I was doing.
Sometimes.
Well, yeah, sometimes. But so I reached out to her, and it was hilarious because I called her in the morning. She called me back. We finally didn't hook up until about 4 o'clock, and she said, Josh, I've had a fall recently, and I've been in rehab, and I've been bedridden. Can we do this interview tomorrow? And I said, yes, we can do it tomorrow. My deadline is tomorrow. So can we do it kind of early? And she's like, nope, let's do it right now. You have a deadline. Let's get this done. And that never happens. Like, everybody always says, let's do it later. But here's this journalist who understands it. And so we did like a 30-minute conversation, and wow, what a conversation. She told me in that amount of time so much about her life. And the story that stuck out to me was, because I can relate to this, was we were talking about the News Press archives in the context of this bankruptcy, and who's going to own all of that stuff. Because as Melinda knows, our stories, our names were scrubbed from the archives. Like, there's 1,000 stories there that say News Press staff writer, no Josh Molina. It's just like, I don't know if that was intentional. It must have been, but our names are gone, and so all I have is what's in my garage, which I have a lot of it, but it's me. So it's just a lot of clutter and boxes, and Marilyn says to me,
you need to call that an archive, Josh. It'll clap up. Don't worry.
I have an archive. Yes, I do. I have all my stuff. Just anyway, Marilyn says, oh, Josh, I have every one of my stories I've ever written in my garage organized. And she said that her kids and her never really appreciated, never really read. And then one day, right, one of her kids, or I think it was her grandkids, found out that she had all of these stories in her garage. They were in there, and they looked at them, and so, what is this? And she said, that's every story I've ever written. And they were blown away. It's like 5,000 articles or something. And later at a family party, she overheard that person say, my grandma has written so many stories, it's unbelievable, and they're in the garage. So even though Marilyn's family, some of them didn't read it in real time, the fact that her grandkid was so proud of her that would share that at an event, that made Marilyn's day. Like, she was so happy. And finally, Marilyn was important as a journalist, because we know that all three of us know this. We do all this work, and we get feedback from the community, and they're like, they love it, and it's positive. And then you talk to your kids, and they're like, I read that.
Yeah. You take the trash out yet? Yeah.
Right. And so I was just so touched by that. We agreed I was going to go visit her, and I was going to do an in-depth profile for Newshawk. She said, anytime, Josh. I've always loved your work, because when I worked there, I was like a young punk, and Marilyn was on the other side of the room, and we didn't really talk, right? But I always knew when Marilyn walked by, you just kind of respect her. There's no politics with Marilyn. You just sort of give her space and let her do her thing, and you just kind of honor her. So I was so looking forward to doing that profile. I had pitched it to the Newshawk editors. They were all for it. and this happened. So I'm really glad Melinda, and I'll let her talk, has her tribute, because she was just an amazing person. And the news reporters get a lot of attention, right? Marilyn wrote for 40 years.
Yeah.
And she's as influential as anyone else in this community journalistically.
Yeah. And Melinda, she not only was, of course, a journalist, but she was also very active in the community with a number of organizations. What was your sense on talking to people that you were interviewing for the obit?
Well, that was something that I learned about Marilyn, that she ran the Junior League of Santa Barbara, that she was part of two women's groups that basically merged with these all-male private clubs in the 1980s and 90s. That's the Channel City Club, 1988, and the University Club, private male domains. Marilyn was one of the first women to be a member. And I think she was most proud, according to her children, most proud of, in her community work, of founding the county courthouse docents. They do tours of the county courthouse. I've actually taken this tour.
Yeah, it's a good tour. I have too.
I waited until I could take a tour from Sheila Lodge, former Santa Barbara mayor. It was a very good tour. And Sheila asked me right at the start, "Are you writing about this, Melinda?" I said, "No, Sheila, I'm just on a tour." But it was excellent. And that is something that Marilyn founded.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, she really was extraordinary. And you recount this in the obit. When I first got to town in 2002, I don't know, it was a day or two after I'd started work. She just, how she just kind of very stride into something
Formidable. Yeah.
Plopped down in a chair, and she wanted to know everything about it. She basically interrogated me about whether I was okay to work there or not. And, she wanted to know about my family, and she wanted to know about my experience, and she wanted to know about what I knew about Santa Barbara, which was nothing. And then she became kind of this guide for me in the community. She took me out. We'd joke about it. She was always I was her date. I was her arm candy, or vice versa. And, she took me to events, fiesta events and VNA lunches, and Channel City Club was something she really, it was very dear to her heart that she introduced me to. So she was a force of nature, which is what her son Steve called her in the obit that ran in Newshawk, which kind of pissed me off a little, because that's what I was going to use in my lead. But it's okay, Steve. We'll let you go. And then before we go, I do also want to note the passing of David Pritchett, a longtime environmental activist in Santa Barbara. Who left town a few years ago, but I think a lot of people remember both for his work and his warm and fuzzy style of things. Josh, you had a nice obit of David in Newshawk.
Yeah, I can't believe that he died. I was shocked.
He's not that old. Was he 57 or something?
59, which is very young, and he was a really influential activist in Santa Barbara and in environmental circles, transportation circles. He was really outspoken. Dave Davis, former community development director for Santa Barbara, called him a bumblebee in your shirt, under your shirt. And he could have conversations with him where they got along, and then a second later they would be violently disagreeing, and so that was Pritchett. He didn't go to meetings and try to get more with honey than vinegar. He just said what he felt, which often meant criticizing elected officials and anyone who he felt was on the wrong side of a environmental issue. He did not like developers at all. He was very much pro preserve passageways for the steelhead trout and Mission Creek. And he was just he said it as he meant it, and he didn't care if you liked him. And so a lot of people respected that. But if you were on the wrong side of him, you just hated him, and I got some of that feedback after the story was published. He was married to former Mayor Kathy Murillo, and they were sort of a little power couple for a time. And they had a community access TV show called Off Leash Dog Affairs. They were Off Leash Public Affairs. They were pit bull activists. And Nick Welsh told me after my story that David said, "Don't you ever call it a pit bull." There's a specific name because pit bull has is a pejorative term, and people think violent dog. It's like a Yorkshire Terrier or something like that.
Well, he was kind of a pit bull himself, I have to say. I mean, he really, and I remember he did try to run for office at one point. He ran for.
Well, here's the thing about David.
Funny to see him try to transform his personality.
Well, see, David was a Democrat. He was environmentalist. He was all the things, right, that you want a Democrat to be, but he was not a Democratic Party favored guy because he would criticize people. He didn't play that game you have to play in order to get endorsed and elected. And so he got about 5,000 votes back when we had at-large elections, and I think he finished 6 out of 13. He didn't raise any money. I mean he raised a little bit of money, but he ran. He didn't win. I think that same election Kathy won, and so it was a little bit bitter. But he went to Reno and kind of reinvented himself there, and there's a David Pritchett pocket park named after him. I mean, that's cool, and he remarried, and I mean, he was what he was. But I got to tell you, I wrote about Lee Moldaver dying a few years ago, David Pritchett. We don't have this anymore. They don't exist. These well-intentioned, smart activists who really make a difference in civic circles. We get a lot of people who complain 1 time, 2 times, but solution-minded activists, they're such a dying breed in this community. And so I think that was David's contribution.
Yeah. I remember, my fondest memory is when I got slimed by the morning paper and basically accused of federal crimes, all on their own. David and Kathy went and organized a little protest, a demonstration when Ampersam's lawyers were going into court to try to, and I didn't even know about it till later that they had done that. I just thought, they were doing it because it was the right thing, and that was a great value system. Melinda, do you have any recollections of David?
Yeah, just a very smart, articulate fighter for the steelhead. That's what I remember him most for. He could be very charming.
All right. Well, let's leave it there. Sorry we couldn't get Callie on to talk about her big cover story in the Independent this week. Really worth reading about a UCSB scientist, David Valentine, who is just really leading the charge about this horrible industrial pollution that much of it previously unknown in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of California. So maybe we'll get Callie on next week to talk about that. So Josh Molina, Melinda Burns, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Thank you all for watching, and we will see you on the other side of Labor Day when oh my God, is the 2024 political season really starting, I guess? Okay. Take it easy. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.